Talita, thank you so much for joining us today from Cape Town. This is a different webinar, and I'm actually quite excited about it. So Talita is one of the top art specialists in Cape Town. If you need a guide in Cape Town to kind of show you around the art scene, really Talita is the person that you want to kind of explore Cape Town with. What I love about Talita is not only does she have incredible knowledge of the art scene in Cape Town and in South Africa, is that she's an artist herself, quite an accomplished artist as well, with many awards. So I think it just gives her kind of an interesting perspective, and you just kind of know a lot of the people that you're talking to. And when you're visiting studios, Talita just kind of gives an insight, kind of has that inside knowledge that makes the experience so interesting and fun. I think today, what I wanted to talk about, so Talita's always finding, what's nice about the tours of Talita is it's not just one format fits all. It's a lot of conversations, trying to figure out people's interests and kind of making the tour reflect people's, what people want to learn about. So there's a lot of like customization, and it kind of goes with the flow and changes based on what people are interested in. So right before COVID well, it didn't start, well, whatever. Right before COVID shut down everything, there was actually a very interesting exhibit called Materiality. I can't even pronounce it correctly, at the National Art Gallery. And I was actually looking forward to seeing it myself. And I was supposed to go to South Africa, but like everyone else, we kind of got stuck and we're stuck at home. So instead of visiting it in person, Talita kindly is going to bring the exhibit to us. And we're not going to see everything in the exhibit. We're going to focus on a few artists and also kind of get some perspective on the work they've done, show some of their studios, and give an overall glimpse of, kind of some of the topics that are interesting. So with that, I'm going to let Talita take over and kind of show us and take us. We're going to try a virtual tour. We've never done this. I mean, I think it's all new. We were just talking earlier with Talita. It's so different when you're trying to talk online and you're not seeing people's faces and getting their reactions right away and able to kind of change it or answer people's questions. But I think I think since it's not such a big group, we can actually make this work and give it a try. So Talita, I will let you take it over from here.
Thank you for introducing me. I'm sitting in front of the National Art Gallery tonight, virtually. I'm just going to use my screen share button, then I can start the slideshow, and then you can get a sense of what I'm talking about.
And also for everyone, thank you so much for muting, and go ahead and put, if you in the chat, as Talita goes along, you have questions, just type them in. If there's a good time to ask them, I'll read them out loud. Otherwise, we'll just get to them at the end of the presentation. So feel free to chat away. I will be reading them as Talita's speaking.
Okay, perfect. So the exhibition that Elizabeth just talked about, Materiality, was really, I guess, one of my favorite exhibitions in a very long time, because it really talked about the process of the artist. So I chose five of my friends, David Brits, Lisa Grobler, Nandipa Ntambu, Ikshan Adams, and Patrick Bongoy. So I'm just going to focus on these five friends. I often go to their studios. I often did go to Nandipa, but she's now moved to Johannesburg. And I'll explain to you why it's not necessarily a good idea to have a studio visit to her specifically. So I'm just going to start with David Brits. I think the most important way to learn about an artist is to actually listen to their own words. So I just want to start every artist by a little quote from them. So David said that often I invent ways to make art making as opposed to sticking in one tradition. Few things are worse than the feeling of being unoriginal, and my process seemed to push me to be inventive in the way I work. So I just want to show you, this is actually the artwork that he had at his Materiality exhibition. It's titled Sinusoidal Nebulous 3. So I actually had to look up sinusoidal. It's a wave-like shape, But anyways, if you look at this artwork, it's very interesting. You see, it really looks like a snake skin, to be quite honest. Um, so if you want to understand, you actually he had in 2016 at a small gallery in Cape Town called Smith Gallery, and it was titled Snake Man. So what's interesting about this and this fascination with the snake form is the fact that his grandfather, John Wood, was one of our leading herpetologists and snake catchers in the 50s and the 60s and 70s in South Africa. So he grew up just outside of London. When he was 10, he caught his first snake. He ended up in Cape Town because of World War II that stationed him here. And then he fell in love with South Africa and he remained in Cape Town. And so when his grandfather passed away, David actually discovered this really amazing scrapbook of his grandfather that had these beautiful photos and cutouts of his whole life of 30 years work. And this kind of inspired him to start making these really beautiful intuitive drawings of snake-like forms, which allowed him to work in an abstract way, which then actually freed him up to be able to actually really really focus on innovation and technology. And that's actually really what I want to get out. I'll show you a really interesting video clip now. I just wanted to just mention, he also really has got this really interesting mythological reference to these sculptures of his. So the one reference is the Hindu symbolism that sees a snake form as a creative force or symbol of potency. And the other mythological reference is the North American tradition of snake medicine. This was quite interesting. So I looked it up, and it's this belief that once you've been bitten by a snake, you receive special psychic energy. So this is also kind of worked into these artworks of his. So this is really quite interesting. So the most interesting recent development in David's studio was this collaboration with the really well-known fashion designer, Daniel Scher from Good Good Good. And you can see the beautiful clothing on the right hand. David actually loves it. He says when he sees people walking around in his clothes, it feels like he is seeing walking, moving sculptures, which I thought was quite cool. And then in the middle, you see one of his cutouts. That's actually representational of snake skin. And then you can also see some of his drawings in his studio, which is really interesting. So I just quickly want to show you a quick short clip that shows this process, because that's really what makes this work very interesting. Just hope it works. So there you can see him doing this very intuitive drawing. It's very interesting. You typed it.
Talita,
Sorry?
I think we only see your presentation. We're not seeing the video.
Yeah. Okay, well, then I'll just explain the video. That's not a problem.
Yeah,
so anyways,
sometimes okay, perfect. Yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
Sorry, I don't know. I thought the link would work. I'm not that familiar with PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's just sometimes when you share, only shares one screen, but
okay, that's fine. Okay, so the video just basically shows him cutting out, drawing this very beautiful intuitive drawing. He does this really interesting thing where he tapes two pencils together to make the drawing. And then he cuts it out, scans it, and then he manipulates it in a three-dimensional modeling program on his computer. This gets printed out with the 3D printer. And then this 3D printed model gets 3D scanned, and that gets cut out of high density foam. And that forms the base of the sculpture, which he then actually covers with resin or with carbon fiber, which is very interesting. And it's actually very advanced kind of technology, industrial technology to use as a sculptor. So that's very interesting. So that's just what I want to show you. But you can Google David Britz and you can find his video online. It's really interesting. Or I can share it if anyone wants to see it. So the next artist I want to talk about is a very good friend of mine, Lisa Grobler. So she said that I tell people that art is a bit like a dream. And sometimes the way you should relate to art is the way you would relate to a dream. If you think about your dream, you must remember how it made you feel. So these are the artwork. First, let me show you the artwork. So this is the artwork at the gallery. Um, it's titled New Networks and Old Friends. And it's made out of thousands of pipe cleaners. So to explain Lisa's work, I want to cite the words of a very well-known critic in South Africa, Lloyd Pollock. So he wrote that her oeuvre is utterly unpredictable, fantastic, phantasmagorical, chimerical, amazing, and off the wall, and always fireworks for the retina and the mind. He also refers to her style of working as grobbeleresque, which, if I can explain it, it literally means it's something that you've actually never seen in your life before. So that really, for me, explains the work in a really interesting way. So I just want to explain this particular installation. It's actually quite interesting. So it's also artwork that you have to see in context of another exhibition. So in 2018, she was asked to participate in the centenary exhibition at Stellenbosch University. And she was actually allowed to choose any space in the Stellenbosch Art Museum. And then she chose the very awkward, tiny space, waiting room space in front of the loo, which I found very strange. And then this installation was actually created for that space. So initially it was just, I don't know if you can see the white pipe cleaners, but it was like a web of white pipe cleaners that she installed in that space. And there was baskets with all kinds of colored pipe cleaners. And the idea was that members of the public could come and add their little pipe cleaner to this web of white pipe cleaners, which is very interesting. But I think because she chose that particular space, people actually participated. Because usually in South Africa, people are just too shy and they don't do anything. But they actually participated and ended up with this weird jumble of a three-dimensional graffiti artwork. So that is kind of what it is. So this was then taken off, reworked for this particular exhibition. So it's a very interesting installation. So this is just some images in a studio. So for me, she's really far out on the cutting edge. If I could explain her work as an artist, she just does make things that you've really never seen before, and it's incredibly creative. If you ask her to explain anything to you, you get taken down this very interesting porthole to another world. You can go to a place in Brooklyn, New York, where she was in residency, or India, or the Karoo, or any place. It's really interesting. And she used these very mundane needlework craft to make her artwork. So knitting or embroidering or weaving. You can see some weaving artworks in the middle image. And then there's a pipe cleaner artwork she's actually starting to work on. So for me, visiting her studio is my favorite place in Cape Town. The first time I actually went and visited her studio, she just gave me a street name and she said, she's behind the golden door. So I literally had to walk up and down the road to try and find the golden door. I found the golden door, and really interesting, very creative artist. So when you meet her, she really entertains. She looks like she stepped off a movie set. She dresses incredibly creatively, and really like she have fun dressing. She also have fun with her art. So it's a very, very interesting artist. You can actually see in the slide, you can see a part of that same installation just after she took it down in a studio. And then I just want to actually say something about this very interesting, I don't know, like you see the painting that's on the trampoline. So that is very interesting on the left. So when I had a studio visit, and this painting was on the trampoline, and this is very odd. So I asked her, why is there a trampoline in your studio and why this painting on the trampoline? And she said, well, she was actually just experimenting how it would be painting while jumping on a trampoline. So that painting was literally created while she was jumping on a trampoline. But a very interesting, very creative, cutting edge artist.
Talita, a quick
Yeah.
question. Were all these for the exhibit, did the artist create pieces specifically for the exhibit, or they brought in, did they have, did they just kind of, did they curate, did the curator just pick pieces that they already had in their collection, or did they ask the artist to specifically make pieces for the exhibit?
So they approached the curator, Andrea Lewis. She kind of she contacted specific artists that she felt was really focused on material or using very unique, interesting materials. And some artists, um, artists always have stuff, from previous exhibitions that they can re-exhibit, especially if you're doing conceptual pieces like these pipe cleaner artwork. Um, so a lot of artists have these things and then they often rework it to fit better with the theme. But some artists did make some original pieces, some of the younger artists. So, it really depends. Every artist kind of is different in what they can offer for a group exhibition like this.
Thank you.
Okay. So I just want to show you the next artist that I want to talk about is Ndipa Mtambu. So her quote about her work says that, "I suppose I've always been interested in that underlying, unclear, complicated space that you can't really articulate." And that really kind of sums up Nandipa's work. So I just want to show you the artwork that's on exhibition by Nandipa. So what's interesting when you look at this artwork, it's titled Veiled Desires 1. The most striking thing is obviously the fact that it's made from cowhide. So it's a very, very particular medium. So what's interesting about Ndipa's medium using cowhide is she often, people refer to her work as representing things like lobola, which is bride price, or the cultural kind of connotations around cowhide. But I find it interesting that the reason she actually decided to use this medium is because of a dream she had when she was still a student at UCT. So what's interesting about Ndipa, she's born in Swaziland and she came and studied in South Africa. So she didn't have the same experience that other South Africans had. She grew up in a different country and came and studied in South Africa. But when she studied at UCT, she was one of very few Black students on the arts campus in Cape Town. And she really struggled to find a voice. She struggled to articulate her concerns around traditional gender roles, body politics, and identity, and all those kind of subjects. And what's interesting is her lecturers at the time actually wanted her to use more African material, which is wood or clay. And then she just decided no ways, and instead she chose to use cowhide, which is very interesting because it's loaded with lots of significance and connotations and all kinds of things. But if you really want to understand this choice of cowhide, you have to go back to this original dream that made her use this material in the first place. And she actually explained that her dream was about death. So that's really her main theme in her work. She really talks about death in very interesting ways. And what's interesting about that particularly is that Ndipa started out studying forensic pathology before she switched to art. So this interest in death is actually something that started long before she even thought of becoming an artist or of using this medium, which is very interesting. She actually explained that she was very interested in chemistry and like figuring out or resolving issues using chemistry. So she actually refers to her studio as a lab, which is very interesting. So I just want to show you, these are some of the images of her work that was on exhibition at Zeitz during its opening exhibition in 2017, which is very interesting. So I thought this would be interesting just to unpack a few of her themes. I just wanted to tell you something about her process. So there's a very good reason why we don't organize studio visits to Ndipa's studio, because she actually does the whole curative process herself of the hides. So she literally starts a process by sorting through piles of salted cowhide. Then she's got to power tool her way through thick layers of fat, which she actually explains is incredibly nauseating. And then she have these hides soaked in a chemical bath, which after a week she then can take out, and she stretches the hides over her molds. So in the center image, you can see, for example, the female form also in these dresses. So she mostly makes use of her own body. So she makes a body cast of her own body and then stretches the hide over this body cast, where she actually physically have to nail it down. And then when it's dried, she can take it off and she kind of sets it with a resin layer. So that's kind of the process, just so you can understand that. But it's a very interesting process. She also often makes use of her mother's body, which is very interesting. I want to touch briefly on traditional gender roles and how she subverts these in her work. And the best work for me, the best example of this is the artwork on the left, the bullfight. I don't know if you see the matador image. So the artwork's title is Mlwa Nkunzi. And it's actually a really interesting artwork. In this video performance, it's a performance that she did in a bullfighting arena in Mozambique. And in this performance, she plays both the role of the bullfighter and the bull. So she'll be the bullfighter, and then she turns around, she's got this beautiful hide kind of adornment that's actually very feminine. It kind of reminds you of a corset on her back. So it's a very interesting kind of performance. But what I find really interesting about this performance is the amount of research that she did before she actually had this performance done. So she actually went to Portugal and job shadowed a bullfighter. And after a whole month of doing this, the trainer of this matador actually spoke to her for the first time, and he asked, okay, so why are you here? What do you want? And she said, I want to train as a bullfighter. And he basically just coldly said, no, because you're a woman. So what's interesting is through her art, she did become the matador, but she also chose to become the bull, which is very interesting. So I just wanted to end with something that I found quite interesting. So she explained that she's always been interested in this understanding, or our understanding, of male and female. And the reason for this is because of her own androgynous appearance. So Ndipa is incredibly tall and incredibly strong. So she's got a very, very strong masculine presence, which is very interesting. And she confessed, but you know, even though she's got this very strong masculine presence, she actually confessed that she, like her mother, never leaves the house without makeup, and she never gives any indication of a struggle, which I found really quite interesting. So this is just the introduction on Ndipa's work. I just want to show you, so one thing that I didn't mention that I found really interesting. So if you look at the dresses on the right, what I find interesting in Ndipa's work, it's always this representation of both things. So it's attraction, repulsion, it is life and death, it is male and female. And so if you look at those garments, what is really interesting, on the one side, it's this beautiful sewn garment. But if you turn around, you see the other side of the hide. So you're always aware of the very traumatic end of the cow's life or the living being's life, and that space becomes almost like a ghost space that is open for anyone to enter, which is very interesting. It's almost like looking at a ghost image because it's a no form, which is very interesting. So I'm just going to go to Irshan. So Irshan is also a very dear friend of mine. We used to have studios right next to each other in Woodstock, and we made many jokes about our names. So Irshan means big man, and Talita means little girl. So we used to joke quite a lot about us having studios right next to each other. But he's a really interesting artist. This quote for me sums up what his work is all about. So he said that I was so keenly interested in my identity, specifically my political identity, my body, my race, my gender, my sexuality, and my experiences according to those lines. So this is his artwork at the materiality exhibition. It's the one on the wall. So I didn't realize we're going to have lockdown when I went to take these photos. So I know his work so well. I didn't think it was necessary to take like a proper photo of his artwork. But I hope you can see it. It's actually really beautiful artwork. It is these little children's prayer mats that's sewn together. And then in the foreground, you see a portrait of Irshan made out of off-cut pieces of material. So it's very specific. To understand Irshan's work, you really have to understand his background, where he came from. So Irshan grew up in Bonteheuwel. It's one of the most gang-ridden areas on the outskirts of Cape Town. His grandparents raised him and his brother because his father had a drinking problem and his mother earned minimum wages working as a machinist in a textile factory. So she couldn't really afford looking after them. What made things even more confusing was his grandfather was Christian and his grandmother was Muslim. So they celebrated Christmas and Ramadan. Irshan was also classified as being Cape Colored, growing up during the apartheid era, which made it very complicated to understand his identity in South Africa at the time, because you were not black or white. It's kind of an in-between place. And then what made matters even worse is he had to cope with being gay, growing up in a very, very tough neighborhood. So, so it's interesting for me, all these elements. And when you look at the artwork, you can really see it. You can see he's grappling with his religion, his identity, the association with the feminine kind of pattern you can see in the material. But for me, Irshan's work is really a way for him to process what happened with him and heal, and to find truth and closure for things in his life. So one of the most powerful artworks that he's ever made, he actually made the same time he made this self-portrait. So I just want to show you that artwork. So on the left, you'll see this very strange image of someone being washed. So that is Irshan and his father, Amin Adams. So for me, what was really interesting about that performance, it was titled Please Remember, was the fact that his father actually agreed to participate in this performance. And also to agree to show a very, very private Muslim ritual, which was very interesting. So what they are doing is they're actually performing a burial ritual. So in Muslim culture, if you die, the person that's the same sex closest to you kind of perform this very particular ritual. So in his case, it would have been his father. So his father washed him, and then when he finished washing him, he wrapped him really beautifully in these white rags or white pieces of linen. And then what's interesting, at the end of this performance, Irshan actually returned to life from this kind of lifeless state. And for him, it was kind of representational of this rebirth that formed a reconnection to his father and his heritage, and a way to heal the rift that was caused through abuse and rejection over the years that he was estranged to his father. So it was a very, very interesting performance. And then on the other images is also very interesting. So Irshan, his choice of material is also very specific. So he specifically uses offcuts, material offcuts, pieces of yarn, beads, all kinds of things that is associated to the textile industry. So he's got these very fond memories where he'll tell you how he sat next to his mom and he would play with all the little offcuts that fell on the floor next to her. So for me, this is really a way to connect with his mother. And what's interesting is the images or the designs that he makes in these tapestries represents vinyl floor panels, which is very interesting. So if you, I don't know, I mean, very few people would actually, I guess, go to Bonteheuwel and go walk around in the houses there. But all the homes have these really cheap vinyl floor covers. And they're all worn out, how people have been walking around on it. And he kind of literally kind of recreates these worn out linoleum floor panels in these beautiful, rich kind of tapestries, which is very interesting. The tapestry that the women are busy working on in the middle of the slide, they're actually weaving on burglar bars, which is very interesting. So the the reference to the linoleum and the reference to this material is really a reference to the domestic space that kind of formed a safe space for him. But the burglar bars is kind of a reminder of the danger that was outside of this very safe environment where he grew up in. So it's quite an interesting explanation, just a way to understand his work. So the last artist I just quickly want to introduce to you is Patrick Bongoi. He said that my work speaks in response to the global reality of literal and figurative environmental pollution, from the erosion of economic viability for people, social cultural decay impacting on community and individual behavior, as well as the natural, rural, and urban landscapes. So that's quite a mouthful. But just to explain Patrick, you have to really understand that he is from Kinshasa and the DRC, and that he currently lives in South Africa in exile because of his views on the Congolese government's exploitation of people working in the rubber industry. So he literally had to flee for his life, and then he ended up living in South Africa. So you can really see all of this in his work. So I just want to show you, this is his artwork at the exhibition. It's titled Killing Time, Conversation in Limbo. So if you look at those two figures, they're kind of these two defeated figures. The one looks like he's suffocating. It looks like there's a bag or something on his head. And if you look close, you'll see they're actually tied together, which is quite interesting. And they're completely made out of strips of rubber that's been woven together, which is very interesting. So this very choice of material directly reference to this exploitation of labor that he often talks about in his work. So what's interesting, almost at the same time when this exhibition was opening in Cape Town, another exhibition opened in Stellenbosch, which I'm going to take you to. So this is actually this was Patrick's installation at the Stellenbosch Triennale, which is very interesting. So in February, there are quite a lot of stuff happening in Cape Town, usually. So this year we just had the art fair and then the Stellenbosch Triennale, and then all the museums put up kind of really interesting special exhibitions. So this was a part of the Stellenbosch Triennale's installation work, which is very interesting. The middle picture is a really beautiful picture of Patrick for me. But just to explain to you this artwork. So this artwork's title is Across Currents, which is very specific. What's interesting is it's like a rubber cage. If you look from the outside, you can't actually see what's inside. You just see these rubber strips. And then when you enter this rubber cage, the first thing that you notice is this very famous jazz song from the Congo. It's titled Likambo ya Ngang. No, sorry, it's a bit difficult for me to pronounce it. But if I translate it, it means other people's stuff. So what's interesting is through this reference to rubber, he very specifically refers to King Leopold's rule over the Congo from 1865 to 1909. So what's interesting is the colonialists during this imperial period was really interested in Africa for its resources. They actually divided Africa up according to what was where. So Belgium said, we want the Congo because we want rubber. And that is kind of how they worked it out. It was also during this particular time that almost 3 million people were sent as slaves across the Pacific Ocean. So it was quite a specific time in the Congo's history. So this reference, you can actually see in the installation on the floor. So I don't know if you can see, but if you look on the left, you'll see the floor is kind of waved. So he wanted to have this reference to ocean waves of being sent over the ocean or people coming from across the ocean, which is very specific. So this is what is really interesting about this specific soundtrack that was played for this installation is he just played one specific part of it, the choir piece or the chorus, sorry. So it's, if basically said bombo, macambo, eh. So if I translate that, it is kind of repeating the words to hide stuff, which is very interesting. So Patrick explained that the values have been poisoned and fallen away, and that the current leaders are just as corrupt, greedy, and vulnerable people still get exploited. So if you look at the installation, it's really interesting. There's all these little alphabet letters. I don't know if you see it suspended in the air. So what's interesting about that is he tried to explain this to me, and he said it's like people saying things or promising things, and it just kind of floats away in the air. It gets blown away. So it's these kind of weird floating letters. But for me, this installation really echoes how many Congolese and fellow Africans feel about their history and their heritage. It's hidden, it's untold, and people often get lied to, which is very interesting. So all of these aspects are kind of woven into this artwork. So I just actually wanted to play a little short part of the song. So I don't know, I hope it works, not like the video clip.
Can we make it a little louder?
Louder, yes. Sorry. Is that better? Is that better?
It was better, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry, that was kind of a weird end. But anyway, so I hope you enjoyed the introduction to these artists, and I would love to answer any questions.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Thank you. You did an incredible job. Thank you. I really feel like I got a nice overview. So yeah, if anyone wants to unmute as well or just chat, you know, I know it's always intimidating sometimes because you're always like, oh, am I going to ask the right question? But I think it's, we're a small group, so feel free to. You mentioned material, like the art gallery. Are there a lot of exhibits there? Or you kind of like when you first mentioned about having the exhibit there, you thought it was kind of an interesting venue.
So actually, yeah, I mean, there's actually so many things. So the company gardens is a very interesting space in Cape Town. And currently at the South African Museum, there's a really, really special exhibition that shows Chris Henshelwood's archaeological discoveries. And what we really love about it is there's actually the first symbolical object ever made by Homo sapien that's exhibited just there. So literally the oldest artwork made by us, which is very interesting, and you can actually see it there. And then we also have really beautiful rock art. So if I would have to say, okay, there's a Pieta in South Africa, our Pieta, it would have been the Linton panel, which is a rock artwork that's also exhibited at the South African Museum. And then you can just literally walk across to the National Art Gallery. It's just the building that's behind me in this weird virtual photograph. But it's not a massive gallery, but they always have really interesting exhibits on. So at the moment, they have this really interesting materiality exhibition, but I mean, there's over 20 artists that's represented in this exhibition. I just took 5. So you can spend an hour just looking, even more, just looking at this one exhibition. And then they also have a really interesting exhibition on drawing, which is really beautiful. And it is lots of things from the vault of the museum. So you can see from Picasso's drawings, and then exhibited next to, you know, one of our, I don't know, struggle Black artists like Demile Fenier's drawings exhibited next to each other, which is a very interesting conversation, really interesting to see. I don't know what's the rest in the, they were busy installing things and then we had lockdown, but they always have at least 4 exhibits that you can see, which is really nice. And it's not a massive museum. It's very different from the museums that you have in America, for example, where this is easy to do in 2 hours or in an hour. And then you can have some really nice coffee in the company gardens, which is really lovely. So it's quite a nice space. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I haven't. Yeah, no, I think it does. And then someone was asking, are galleries open right now? I would assume not.
No. The galleries are open on, you can actually make an arrangement to go and visit the gallery. So they have exhibitions that's up, and they try and market it virtually. So you can see, you know, every time they've got a new exhibition, they'll show everyone, you know, video, whatever, what's on. But then they have visits on appointment. So, and that would only be really if you're interested in buying something.
Oops. Yeah. So, and so that's just normal. Like when it's like non-coronavirus time, you just make appointments, and then that's
no, not your non-corona time. They are obviously open, and
okay.
You can walk in whenever you want. You can also make appointments. So, I mean, we know the gallery owners very well. They're really friends of ours. So if we have someone that wants to see something and it's a Sunday, it's possible to make a special arrangement and they'll open up the gallery. But you know, yeah, it's on arrangement if it's not their like typical opening hours.
Perfect. And then when you do the when kind of putting together the tours, I guess you could just do any theme. Do you have a favorite that you usually like to? I mean, is there some that you're just more passionate about, like a specific theme you like to explore with people if they're just kind of starting for the first time and trying to like discover the art scene of South Africa?
I have to say it's a very difficult question to answer because there's such amazing variety. I mean, we've got an amazing contemporary art scene in South Africa. My particular favorite is really the Poly Street artists or the struggle artists. That was really prominent 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s even. And one particular museum collection that's now recently added to Cape Town is the Norval Foundation. What's really lovely about them is that they have these particular artists' work at that museum. So I really love to show people those works because if you think of our famous artists like William Kentridge, people don't always understand that Kentridge was really influenced by David Kulawani, one of these struggle artists. And you know, so it's for me, it's actually important to also have that kind of historical kind of understanding of our contemporary art, which I find really interesting.
So, and the art scene in Cape Town, is it mostly in Cape Town? Because I see a lot of Stellenbosch as well. Is it kind of the same galleries in both, or you kind of have 2 different sets of galleries between the 2 places?
So I have to say the art scene is very different in Cape Town than how it is in Stellenbosch, and it's very different in Stellenbosch to how it is in Franschhoek. So every area is kind of have their own kind of, I don't know,
niche or group.
Yeah, I don't know how to explain it, like their own aura. I don't know.
Yeah.
Explain it. But I mean, you'll have, for example, Everard Reed Gallery in Cape Town, which is their big space, and then they have a tiny space, well, sort of tiny, not too big space in Franschhoek. But what they actually show in the 2 different spaces are very different. So they kind of cater to these kind of different kind of, I don't know, settings. But I mean, all over Cape Town, and the winelands, there are so many artists, there are art studios, there are different people working in different media. I mean, if you go to Durbanville, which is the area that's often not seen, they have the original clay quarries in South Africa. And, you know, you can see some really interesting ceramicists there. Or if you go to Paarl, they've got the stone quarries there. Or, you know, it depends where you go. And for us, it's really important to kind of know what people are interested in seeing, because then you can kind of say, okay, well, if you're really interested in ceramics, let's do a really interesting tour. We go to Durbanville and we go to the Clay Museum or whatever. I mean, it really depends on your interests.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're really super interested in historical art, we have access to the storage vault at the National Art Gallery. And we've got access to quite really interesting special historical collections, which is also really interesting. Very rare artworks on paper that dates back to 1680 something, or things like that, which is very interesting, but it's quite a different experience than when you do a contemporary art tour or when you do a design tour or whatever it is that you're interested in.
Because I was like kind of intrigued. So February, you kind of mentioned in your presentation, February is a big month for kind of art exhibits and in Cape Town. Is that right? You kind of mentioned it quickly, and I was just curious about that.
No, it is definitely. What's interesting is February is actually the best weather in Cape Town. So if you're interested in having good weather, come in February. And I think everyone kind of caught on to that. So I think that is why we ended up having the Cape Town Art Fair in February. And then obviously the Stellenbosch Triennale and all the other things that happen kind of latch onto the Cape Town Art Fair because they know lots of international visitors would come during that particular time. So it is quite a busy time art-wise.
Okay, that's good to know. So I will remember that February is a good time for all the art fairs and all those special exhibits.
Yeah, so there's actually 2 times so in the year. So in February, we've got the art fair in Cape Town. In September or August, it's the art fair in Johannesburg. So depends if you want to go to Cape Town or to Joburg. But I mean, we have visitors that probably like went to the Johannesburg Art Fair and then they also come to Cape Town and then we'll also show them things here. But it is also quite a busy time for artists in South Africa.
Will you travel to Johannesburg to show people around?
Yes, we actually recently really started to work on offering what we're doing in Cape Town and Johannesburg too, because Johannesburg is also a very, very unique art scene, very different from Cape Town. But we ended up actually resulting to having 2 team members there. So we work with 2 women in Cape Town, in Johannesburg. The one's name is Susie Copperwaith. So she's got lots of experience working in auction houses and works as an art consultant. And Imre Lamprecht also works as an art consultant. So we kind of use them because it isn't always viable if you're just going to spend one day in Johannesburg to have a guide fly up with you to Johannesburg. So it just kind of makes it a little bit more practical. But we have done big groups where we've traveled with them to Johannesburg. So it depends on what type of tour it is.
Yeah, and I have found Johannesburg to be fascinating. I mean, it's very, I don't know, I really enjoyed the art scene in Johannesburg. I just felt very alive and a lot happening out there. Not that Cape Town as well, but Johannesburg also was quite fascinating. So I would definitely encourage everyone to do both.
Yes, no, I agree. It's a very different city. So for me, Johannesburg is much more African city, which is very interesting in its own way.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're going to kind of, wrap this up. I really enjoyed the presentation, and I think this was just kind of a taste of what, you can have in person. I really look forward to traveling again and being able to visit and see all this in person and talk to you in person versus this virtual world, we kind of surreal world we live in now. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone for coming, and look forward to, you know, talking to you soon and having everyone come to Cape Town and visit again.
Yes, great.
So have a great evening, and I will talk to everyone soon. Thanks, Talita.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.